As time goes on, from a liberty perspective, some things are getting better, others are stagnating, and some are indeed getting worse, such as freedom of association, for instance. But as we continue to strive to increase the degree of liberty, maybe there are a few things you could do for yourself and your loved ones to increase your personal liberty and also to keep the morale up. Because it is in the human nature to decrease your morale if enough time goes on without seeing some results. In religion, this conundrum is fixed by doubling down on faith, but in politics, that's not how it's done. Well, unless you want to make politics your religion, in which case the left is that way. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so this video is a combination of practical politics and, I guess, life hacks. As usual with these kinds of videos, I am not under the impression that what I'm about to say is the divine truth or the ultimate truth. Nor am I under the impression that my list is exclusive or exhaustive. Also, I'm not saying that my advice necessarily works everywhere, although what I'm about to say does apply essentially in every country loosely associated with the Judeo-Christian civilization. Anyway, you get the point. I'm not the all-knowing figure, and this list is the result of the experiences of all the people associated with this operation. So without further ado, let us begin. Number 1. Tightknit personal network. Now, I did mention this in another practical politics video, namely the need to build our own private institutions, but this is a good opportunity to expand on that. The phrasing "our own private institutions" sounds very pompous and formal in this circumstance, because what is meant is simply to have several people, could be as few as 2, in which you can trust in most situations. Most people already claim to have that, but in reality only a tiny minority of those actually do have that. And I'm the first to admit that this is not easy to construct such a network, but it is nevertheless an essential step towards practicing liberty as a lifestyle choice. Now, the use of such network depends on the degree of trust. Then this notion is, of course, tied with the wider notion of social capital, although not in the way collectivists are using it today, but rather in the way Alexis de Tocqueville used to use it. Basically, get yourself a few deep friends. Now, are there risks associated to this? Yes, of course, as with everything else in life, really. Which is why I said it's not easy to construct such a network, but as experience shows, it is nevertheless doable. It is never too late to start, but I admit it is slightly easier if you start early on in your life. It is much easier to start building a long-lasting network if you're in your late teens or your 20s than it is if you are in your 60s. The biggest challenges, outside of the obvious risk of betrayal, are isolation if you live or work very far away from a middle town or a big city, and lack of patience. In addition to not being easy, building such a network takes time. So be patient and try to hang around places with a population density higher than 1 person per square kilometer. With enough patience and, yes, a bit of luck, such a network can significantly improve not just your own level of liberty and satisfaction, but also those of the people inside your network. For any leftist watching this, yes, this concept is exclusionary. This concept used to be quite normative in the past and much more institutionalized through various means such as churches, fellowships, brotherhoods, sisterhoods, clubs, and so on and so forth, that would facilitate the building of such networks. Nowadays, most of that has gone away, so the process is much harder, but the aims are still the same. For instance, I have a friend that if he calls me that he's stuck in, let's say, the Republic of Congo, I'm in the first flight to Congo. Because I know beyond reasonable doubt that he would do the same. Admittedly, such bonds get strengthened in harsh times. When you broke the same slice of bread together with someone and you avoided dying of starvation together, and I mean that as literally as I can, that bond is much harder to weaken than when everything that connects you is a political belief or similar financial interests or whatnot. So, even before starting to build this, work on your character first. Nevertheless, as a general rule, you'll end up with people quite similar to you over the long run. So as I said, the concept is quite exclusionary. In my experience, the most common challenge, especially for men, once such a network is constructed, is marriage. Men, for whatever reason, tend to forget their own support network once they get married, and that's usually a good predictor of suicide if the marriage goes wrong. So keep that in mind if you are or you plan on getting married. Human bonds are like plants in many ways. You need to water them from time to time. They're remarkably resilient if built on solid foundations, but they're not eternal if no tenderness is applied. Number 2, financial diversity and cash. This is somewhat connected to number 1, in the sense that one step towards a higher degree of liberty is financial wiggle room. It is much more preferable to take a loan from a trusted friend than from a bank. This is true in all circumstances, regardless of the amount. But it goes beyond that. Using your personal network, you can, and indeed should, strive to diversify in everything financially related. In this particular case, diversity actually is strength. Now, I'm sure you've heard from various financial consultants about the benefits of a diversified portfolio, but even though this particular knowledge is widely available, it is not widely applied, and that's terrible. One reason I suspect this isn't the case is because way too many people think that they themselves are too poor for this piece of advice to apply to them. Well, if you're watching this, you're clearly not too poor. If you're making more than, let's say, $5,000 per year, then you're clearly not too poor to consider this. Now, sadly, most discussions on this topic have been made toxic by the constant mocking of the so-called prepper view, so most people today think that preparing with investments is only for rich people, hedge fund managers, and crazy loonies or preppers. But that's simply not true. Everyone needs to accumulate and diversify capital and think of his own future. Yes, not everyone will be the same, but the tools are quite similar both for when you have $1 billion and for when you have $1,000. So, in addition to practicing the cash is king mentality, also consider doing small investments in hardly traceable or untraceable things such as physical silver, platinum, oil, lithium, guns, and other similar things. Having your own house, not an apartment, with a few guns inside it is liberty. Having your whole livelihood in a tiny apartment in an expensive area is not liberty. It's really that simple. Then the reason for this is also quite simple. The price of that apartment will change, sometimes upwards, sometimes downwards, and this will soon be an issue for the Swedish people, for instance, who've been betting perpetually on rising real estate prices, and when that thing will burst, and it will, make no mistake, those who did not prepare for this will suddenly find out that they're poorer than the average worker in Malawi. And most are not prepared for it. It will be quite fun to watch, believe me. And while we're on this topic, my American friends, please, stop looking at your home exclusively as a commodity. If it's your home, aim at keeping it your home rather than constantly worrying about its price. If you can't afford this, then work towards affording it instead of occupying your mind with something that is largely outside of your control. Just saying. Anyway, as a practical advice, start looking up for ways to diversify, preferably in ways you can control. A piece of platinum on your shelf is something you can control. Stock bonds at some hedge fund in another country is something you cannot control. The best is to have them both. The point is not to become a prepper. The point is to always have, well, as they say, your ass covered. Basically, build your own safety net. Practice liberty on your own first. Because if shit hits the fan, the so-called safety net of the state will suck. And it will suck bigly. Just saying. Alright, number 3, privacy. Now, I touched quite a lot on this in the video called Conservatism as Applied to Technology, published in October 2016, as well as in the video The Virtue of Discretion, published in April 2016. But I cannot stress enough just how important guarding your privacy is. And to make things worse, those who claim to be the most liberty-loving tend to also suck the most at preserving their privacy. And I say preserving privacy precisely because privacy, like free speech, is a natural right or a negative right that needs preservation and securing and not something to be given to you. It's not a positive right. And the biggest enemy of privacy is not, surprisingly enough, the government nor most corporations, but the actual individuals. For instance, the surveillance state would have never grown so much if not for 1/3 of the global population willingly buying and carrying around with them, essentially at all times, a camera conveniently stored in their pocket coupled with a GPS sensor. Because that's what a smartphone is. Over 700 million smart TVs reside in regular people's households as we speak. That means at least 1 billion people, almost a seventh of the world population, is under 24/7 surveillance in the moments they believe they're the safest to speak freely. Now, this is not paranoia. Samsung publicly admitted that their smart TVs are indeed listening and broadcasting the people's living room chatter. And not only that, but smart TVs have a camera and many of them have a facial recognition software, or they're connected to the web and the facial recognition software isn't hard to connect to. I won't even bother to mention things like Google Home, Amazon Echo, and other convenient gadgets, which are convenient, alright, just not for the user. All of these are very convenient for your surveillance. And again, it's not just the government, it's also hackers. How do you think many private sector intelligence agencies emerged lately? Conspiracists will tell you that there are traitors in governments that are assisting this, and they would be mostly wrong. In the overwhelming majority of the cases, it's really the people themselves who are facilitating this. Now, I'll leave several links in the description for you to read more about this particular subtopic. But privacy is a bit more than avoiding surveillance technology. Privacy is in itself a lifestyle choice. For instance, if you rent something, do you really need a contract with your full name on it? Depending on the purpose of renting and the country, you'll be surprised to find out the many instances when you really don't. Or do you really need a contract in your name connected to your personal bank account for an internet connection? Again, in most situations, you'll be surprised to find out that you actually don't. And the list goes on and on. And what I'm saying is not revolutionary in any way, it's merely a conservative look at life in which one looks at anything that is bigger than his family and maybe his immediate friends with restraint and, yes, suspicion. As a matter of trade-off, it is better to be suspicious and turn out to be wrong about it than not to be suspicious at anything. The damage in the latter case is almost always much bigger. Alright, number 4, unregistered activities. Now, the proponents of the maximal state have been quite efficient at convincing way too many people that it is better to register all of your activities with the state. And surprisingly to me, this move was much more successful in the United States than in Europe. Well, at least in the portion of the United States that votes Democrat. The South is a different business. But the question you should always ask yourself is, why? Why would you do that? An extreme example that comes to mind is the collection of truly outstanding stories of local and state authorities in leftist areas of the United States cracking down on private dinner parties. And I wish I were joking. In Chicago, the authorities cracked down in 2014 on what they called unregulated eating. Because heaven forbid you eat whatever you damn please without the approval of the bureaucrats. In New York, back in 2013, CBS did a whole investigative story about the, quote, clandestine dinner parties about which insiders say they are completely unregulated, close quote. Can you imagine? Completely unregulated dinner parties! That's horrible! Or is it? One of the ways to increase your level of personal liberty and also help others is to patronize as many of these unregulated activities as possible. The market is also a democracy. Every time you buy from Starbucks instead of an unregulated restaurant, you are voting for lefty Starbucks and against liberty. It sounds harsh, but that's really what it is. But this is more than just about food. It's about essentially any purchase. If you can give business to an unregistered shop, you should do that. This not only starves the state of revenue, but also helps increase the incentives for more and more people to look to liberty as a lifestyle choice and in the end help increase the reach of our ideas. For instance, except some of the hard drives, every single piece of technology used to make these videos possible is bought from the black market. Whenever I meet the fans in other cities, I try my best to hold the meeting in an unregistered place or at someone's home, so as to decrease not just the visibility, but also the tax revenue and the level of control that the government might get from that meeting. If none of that is possible, then a registered business known for tax evasion is the next best thing. If the government still lets it operate, then it's not my problem. Most of the things I propose here are far from being illegal. They're rather in the so-called gray area, and any tax attorney worth his salt will tell you this. There is the white area, the black area, and the gray area. And the best course of action is to give the government the black area, keep the white area, and make the government fight hard for every inch of the gray area. And the more people support the gray area, the harder is the fight for the maximal state. And finally, number 5, limit exposure. Now this is somewhat connected to privacy, but it goes beyond just that. By limit exposure, I mean limiting the possibilities of you being blackmailed. It is not uncommon at all for governments, but also private enterprises, to try to persuade you to do something for them in exchange of maintaining the secrecy of things you did, or to make them disappear. This includes, but it is not limited to, having affairs, taking illicit drugs, engaging in weird sexual practices such as BDSM, domination, fetishes, and so on and so forth, or any other thing used to blackmail people. Now, mind you, I'm not saying don't do any of these things, although it would indeed be preferable if you wouldn't, especially the affairs part, but I am saying to be moderate and limit exposure. What that means in practice depends on the individual. For instance, if you're really into illicit drugs, make sure you do that with the knowledge of as few people as possible, preferably only people in your trusted network that I spoke at the beginning of this video. If you're into weird fetishes, make sure there's no recording of that, and so on and so forth. I hope you get the point. Basically, take the necessary precautions to limit liabilities. This again used to be normative behavior for any fully grown adult, but in the current year, being mature with yourself is sometimes viewed as weird. And what I'm saying is that it's better to be viewed as weird, but be freer, than to be viewed as normal by today's standards and be fundamentally less free than the global norm. Because make no mistake, in terms of personal liberty, one is freer in Brazil or in Republic of Georgia than in Sweden. So there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And this list is meant to teach you how you can tilt some of those trade-offs slightly more into your favor. You'll never get anything and everything you want in terms of liberty, but you can get more than what you're getting now. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching, thank you for your continuous and generous support, and I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.